Since Fallout 3, I've been a casual fan of the Fallout series. I enjoyed my time in Bethesda's reimagining of the franchise, but when Fallout 4 came out, it was overshadowed by The Witcher 3 and other games I was heavily anticipating the same year. When Fallout 76 was announced, my friends and I were tenuously excited by the idea of playing Fallout with others, but there was this feeling that something could go horribly wrong. Fallout 76 was going to be Bethesda Game Studios' first attempt at a multiplayer game, and they already were known for making buggy and unpolished games, so multiplayer added many more factors that could go wrong. Upon the game's release, I saw the shower of criticism the game received, and chose to keep my money for something else. I never planned to play Fallout 76 until this.
And in the spirit of free, we're doing something special just for E3. Fallout 76 is going to have a free trial for everyone starting tomorrow.
Since Bethesda had more than half a year to add content and fix bugs, I thought I'd take this opportunity to give Fallout 76 a fair shake and let my own experience speak for its quality. The first few hours of a game are critical to get new players hooked and motivated to press on through the rest of the game. Bethesda's first Fallout game had one of the most distinct introductory sections of any video game. The player sees their character grow up, form relationships with other vault dwellers, and see the politics going on within the vault. The intro in the vault provides context for when the player enters the world. The player is leaving behind the only life they've known, the safety of the vault, and their best friend when they enter the capital wasteland. Their life is never going to be as simple as it was growing up in the vault. In Fallout 76, the player wakes up on Reclamation Day, the designated day when Vault 76 opens and vault dwellers go out to reclaim the wasteland. Most other vault dwellers have already left, so it's time for the player to play catch-up reclaiming the nuked remains of America. I was excited to explore the vault and see what I could learn about other vault dwellers. Unfortunately, the game simply pushes the player down a corridor where they pick up their important gear, one piece after another. At each gear station, there's a Mr. Handy robot that offers impersonal quips. I was expecting these robots might talk about our time together in the vault, but there's no sign of real connection between the players and robots. The player character spent more than 2 decades in the vault living with the robots and supposedly every other human player they meet. But both the robots and other humans are complete strangers unless you're playing with friends, and even in that case you're playing with them as your real-life friends and not as fellow vault dwellers. Going through the vault, there's almost nothing the player can interact with other than the items the robots offer. As I searched for something interesting, the music swelled and the vault door began to open. I didn't want to deny the game its moment, so I played along and walked out of the vault. Once the load screen had finished, I realized I didn't have a weapon. At first I was convinced I must have missed one in the vault, but the vault had locked behind me, so I quickly found a body and relieved it of its pistol. Later I checked online to see if I had really missed a weapon and found I had not. The vault devoted to reclaiming the wasteland apparently didn't keep a stash of weapons with which the reclaimers could defend themselves. However, with disbelief suspended, I had found a weapon nonetheless and was ready to explore the forest of Appalachia. Bethesda games have always had a heavy emphasis on exploration and looting pretty much everything in sight, and this emphasis is even stronger in Fallout 76. With minimal non-player characters that have anything to say, the player has almost no break from the loop of entering locations, killing whatever is there, and then doing with their loot as they wish. This loop has never bothered me before, but it quickly began to bore me in Fallout 76. In Fallout 3, Skyrim, and Oblivion, I'd gather quests from settlements and quest givers, and then visit whatever locations showed up on my way to the quest objectives. After I had obtained whatever quest item I needed, or killed whatever person or creature that was causing a settlement trouble, I'd return to the quest giver to get my reward. These visits with the NPCs gave me an opportunity to break up the shoot and loot loop, with a chance to get to know the world and the survivors that lived within it. There's no break like that in Fallout 76. Quests are usually obtained from computer terminals, radio signals, notes, and audio logs, so there's no real interaction with anyone. Because there's no social mechanics like dialogue trees for interacting with NPCs, the quests are almost all about looting a particular item, listening to a dead person's audio log, or getting multiple items to craft a different item. So the quests are still part of the never-ending shooting and looting. This might be okay if the loop alone was compelling, but 76 core loop couldn't get me interested for a variety of reasons. Firstly, Fallout 76's combat struggles to be consistently satisfying. The game experiences the common RPG shooter problem of weapons either hitting like a truck or kicking like a kitten, depending on whether the player is over or under leveled for whatever they're fighting. So I tended to fight enemies that were my level or lower. When fighting enemies of an appropriate level with appropriate gear, combat is relatively easy. Enemies usually have regular firing patterns that allow plentiful time for the player to peek out of cover, take a shot, and repeat until all enemies are dead. It was rare that I was brought to low health, and when that happened, I had a massive reserve of stim packs to bail me out. The fact that health is tied to consumable items meant that I was playing extremely conservatively, avoiding damage whenever possible. But with the relatively high toughness of the player character, there wasn't much reason to be concerned if I got caught out in the open. Because of these factors, the combat had neither the tension of cover-based shooters where player vulnerability keeps combat interesting, or the fast pace of a game like Doom, which keeps players engaged with the raw energy of the combat loop. To be fair, Fallout shooting was never great, but VATS used to make up for it both practically and stylistically. I loved VATS in Fallout 3. Queuing up 4 shots and watching my attacks play out in slow motion never ceased to be satisfying. But with Fallout 76 being online, VATS had to be reworked. Since time can't stop anymore, VATS just auto-targets an enemy with a % chance to hit. The chance to hit is constantly changing, especially with more mobile enemies, so it's rare that VATS is more reliable than just pointing and shooting. For tough-to-hit enemies like small rad roaches and mole rats, I would just switch to a melee weapon that was more forgiving to aim rather than using VATS. Without VATS, I was forced to deal with just how basic and slow Fallout combat really is.
Fallout 76 is a prequel to all the other games, and it's our biggest one yet. It is 4 times the size of Fallout 4.
Another issue with 76 is just how much time the player spends walking from place to place. When one makes an open world larger, that also means it's going to take longer to get around the world. Sometimes scale increases like this include the addition of vehicle or mount, like when The Witcher made the transition from a zone-based RPG to an open world with The Witcher 3. But the player doesn't have a mount like Roach to help them get around in 76, so they have to rely on their own tuned legs. Unfortunately, the player's run speed feels no faster than previous games, and sprinting expends action points even outside combat, so traversing the world is a slow process of holding W and pressing shift over and over. This problem is compounded by the fact that if the player is carrying too much weight, they can't sprint, and running costs action points. As a result, I was constantly on top of the game's hunger and thirst mechanics, simply so I could get some weight out of my inventory, and I felt disincentivized to loot anything more than what I needed to keep exploring, as otherwise I would be constantly encumbered and the game would move even slower. The looting loop in Fallout 76 is supposed to go towards crafting weapon upgrades and building the player's settlement. I always thought base building was an odd idea in Bethesda's Fallout games, ever since it appeared in Fallout 4. These games are so focused on nomadically wandering the wasteland that spending so much time building up one place seems somewhat antithetical to the whole idea. Since the crafting and building systems were supposed to be the main payoff for looting, I never found even the extrinsic reward of looting compelling in any way. So I didn't find the main gameplay loop engaging, and many of the changes made to accommodate multiplayer detracted from the experience for me. But how did the presence of other players affect my experience directly? For the most part, I played Fallout 76 in isolation. I had no desire to interact with other players, but I was somewhat surprised by how much I appreciated the presence of other people in Appalachia. When Todd Howard talked about how everybody's nice to each other, I internally laughed at the idea of players not being hostile in a survival game. But, contrary to my expectation, players in Fallout 76 were surprisingly friendly in adventure mode. While I never officially teamed up with anyone, it was always satisfying when I'd run into another player that was on the same quest as me, and we'd clear a location side by side. Most of the time, encounters with players would begin and end with a polite wave, and then we'd both continue on our business. In adventure mode, player versus player combat can only be initiated if the player under attack returns fire, so most people don't even try to start a fight. Playing the game mainly with a single player focus, I appreciated how cooperation was encouraged and hostility was heavily regulated. I didn't want to get to a quest location just to be murdered by some jerk in power armor, and Bethesda thankfully planned around that problem. I will say that while the multiplayer experience did add something even for a solo player, it didn't make up for the failings of the mechanics, and unfortunately, neither did the quest and stories. As mentioned earlier, there's almost no NPCs with any personality in Fallout 76. Most quests are focused towards looting an item or getting components to craft something. What real stories do exist in quests are usually told through audio logs or through text in computer journals or pieces of paper. As a result, the story has already happened. The player is listening or reading about the protagonist and other characters of the story, rather than being the protagonist. In Fallout 76, the player has no influence on most of the stories, and instead is a passive observer. One of the last quests I completed in Fallout 76 gave me hope that there might be actual character interaction and decision making. I heard a voice on the radio requesting aid at the top of the world. When the player arrives, the voice, whose name is Rose, greets the player on an intercom and wants the player to fix a communications array so she can get her communications out further. The player must go to 3 locations to find items for the repairs before going to the array. After completing the repairs, Rose reveals that she's a raider and is going to use her boosted signal to attract like-minded survivors. She admits she planned on the player dying, but offers a reward to the player for helping her out, and invites the player to meet her to receive their reward. Upon reaching the meeting spot, the player finds a Mr. Handy robot who has the personality of the dead raider Rose. She relinquishes the reward and offers the player more work. I thought that this was my opportunity to have an illusion of influence on the world. I saw her life bar and level and thought, I can kill her so that, at least in my own story, I can say that I stopped her from broadcasting to potential raiders. So I took aim and I fired on her, and nothing happened. This was the point that broke the game for me. There's no allowance for the player to have even the illusion that they are affecting the world of Fallout 76, and this stands in stark contrast to previous games in the series. One of my most vivid memories from Fallout 3 comes from its early hours. Most players in Fallout 3 will be drawn to the settlement of Megaton. Megaton is built around an undetonated nuclear bomb that constantly threatens to bring the settlement to a sudden end. One of the earliest quests a player can receive in Fallout 3 comes from the local sheriff who asks the player to disarm the bomb in the middle of town. A different party is also interested in the bomb. If the player speaks to a man named Mr. Burke in the local saloon, Mr. Burke will offer a bounty for the player to detonate the bomb and wipe the city from the map. When I met Mr. Burke, I had the same thought as when I learned Rose was a raider. I can't let this psychopath continue to threaten the people of this world. After talking to Mr. Burke, I immediately entered VATS and killed Burke then and there. I wasn't going to take his deal, and I made sure nobody else could either. After years, I still remember this quest vividly because the consequences of that choice decided whether the city would or would not be erased from existence. I later learned that I even saved the life of the sheriff by killing Burke instead of turning him in. In this quest, I got to roleplay and was rewarded for it with meaningful consequences where Fallout 76 wouldn't allow any choice at all. There was one story in Fallout 76 that stuck with me unlike all the others. After clearing a camp of Scorched, the ghoulish replacements for raiders in Fallout 76, I came across an old church. Walking in, I found the whole congregation was still there, skeletons sitting slumped in their pews. When I took a closer look, I noticed that each person had a cup in their hand or nearby them. I wanted to know what happened. Was this a mass suicide? I walked to the front of the church and found the journal of the leader of the church, a con man that used the devotion of these people for his own desires. When he realized he was losing influence over the congregation, he poisoned them at a gathering and ran off to find someone else to con. There was no significant mechanical reward for this. I received no special loot or experience for this story. But it was one of my favorite moments in the game because of the enjoyment I got intrinsically from the mystery. This reminded me of a settlement in Fallout 3 named Andale. Entering Andale, it seemed like one of the most ideal places in the capital wasteland. Everyone is very friendly, and it's clear that these survivors are pretty well off compared to the others. However, a nosy explorer like myself could find that Andale isn't the town it seems to be. In the basement of one of the homes lies a butchery where the locals prepare the meat of human travelers they've murdered for dinner. The great revelation of this location isn't done through dialogue or an audio log, but rather with environmental storytelling. If the player chooses to end the town's murder spree, they'll receive good karma, and if they choose to support Andale, they'll receive a nice meat pie from the local cannibals. The real payoff, of course, is having experienced the story itself, and not the karma or delicious human pie. There lies the core problem of Fallout 76. Almost no action is rewarding in and of itself. The payoffs for most things in the game are extrinsic rewards like guns or experience points, rather than an experience that is rewarding on its own. I still had another day left in the trial when I put down Fallout 76. I had waited 13 hours for the game to set its hooks in me, but in the end, I simply didn't have the patience left for the game. The game never did anything that made me end a session in a fit of rage, but it also didn't do anything to keep me on the edge of my seat in curious anticipation or excitement. Fallout 76 isn't a bad game, but rather a game drowned in mediocrity. It took all the worst aspects of the previous Bethesda Fallouts while throwing out the best aspects. I'm sure it'd be a grand time to explore the wasteland with friends, but kicking a ball around a field or sitting on a couch chatting with friends can be a good time as well. I hope Fallout 76's Wastelanders update will finally provide compelling content for players to dig into. A couple engaging quest lines and likable NPCs could help break up the shoot and loot gameplay. But as of now, Fallout 76 is a wasteland, nearly devoid of content worth my time.